Good afternoon, and welcome to Smithsonian Gardens Let's Talk Gardens webinar. It's a wonderful series that we produce and hope you turn your brown thumbs green. Or at least we're trying anyway. My name is Cindy Brown. I'm Manager of Education and Collections at Smithsonian Gardens, and I have a pleasure with working with a terrific team of horticulturists, museum specialists, and all kinds of experts. And today we have an expert on seed saving. Well, let's say he's becoming an expert. He's done so much seed saving this year that he now has the ability to share with us and make you understand the process a little bit better. Reminder, please put your questions in the chat box. I'll follow along, and when I come back on, I will ask Philip, and we'll have a conversation that involves your questions. This is going to be the first part of a three-part series. So Philip Evich will speak today on seeds and how to find them. On October 7th, I'm going to speak on the practical steps of saving seeds and how you can do this. And then in January, February, we're going to have a third part, and we're going to show you how you can start your seeds at home so you can put all of your knowledge to use and make your garden even more full. So Philip Evich is a horticulturist that works at Smithsonian Gardens. Presently, he's in the pollinator garden, and you'll see many pictures from the Smithsonian Gardens pollinator garden in today's series. But Philip, I'm going to go ahead and disappear, let you take over, and then I will be back at the end of your presentation to ask you the questions from the audience. Thank you so much. I'll see you soon.
All right, and hello everybody. My name is Philip, as Cindy has introduced me, and I'm really excited to be here with you all virtually, talking about something that I have found so much joy for, not only this year at Smithsonian Gardens, but just throughout my entire experience as a horticulturist, in the many places that I have been able to work and cultivate. So today we are going to be talking about seeds, and more so not how to grow them or really, yeah, we're not going to be talking about propagation, but I really just want to focus on the beauty that is seeds and how they are formed and where they come from. Before I started into studying horticulture, I never realized the truth behind where seeds are on a plant, let alone what they are derived from. And so today I just want to break down a lot of different terminology while we reflect on the many changes that our plants go through over the course of a growing season. So yes, today is a lecture on seeds, but actually I'm going to be talking a lot about fruit. Fruit is the carrier of all seeds. Fruit is how we get them. It's literally what comes from a flower. And we will be examining how these flowers turn into fruits, which then are holding these valuable seeds so that we can continue growing many more plants to come. And this is just a standard diagram of the many different types of fruits, which I will be spending this lecture talking about, going over these terms, which may seem very intense, or you've never heard of a few. I'm sure that's likely. By the end of this presentation, I hope that you have learned a thing or two about the many different forms of fruits, and that they are not just the fleshy, edible, tasty things we buy from the grocery store. So to start us off, before we get talking about some specific plants throughout the lecture, I thought it was important to really give a visual representation of the parts of a flower and then the parts of a fruit and how they are really one and the same. So right here, this is a diagram of a tomato. flower, which is the yellow on the left, and then the tomato fruit on the right. And these terms, which I won't necessarily be talking about throughout the whole presentation, are just a good place to start so that we have a working idea of really the mechanisms at play when we go from a flower to a fruit. So to start off, we think of a flower and we have the petals as labeled, the yellow, bright aspects that we know of a flower. And those are a non-sexual part, um, as well as the sepals, which is a non-sexual part of the flower. Those are those green appendages on the top side there. And a flower sits on the pedicel, which is basically a stalk where the flower sits. And then deeper inside the flower is the sexual parts. And this is where pollination happens and is the starting point for where an ovary, which is the botanical term designated on that flower, holds ovules, which then germinate, or which then pollinate and fertilize into seeds that we then grow after they have ripened. So the sexual parts inside that flower include the stigma, which is where the female part of the flower is receiving pollen, which is received from the stamen, which is also designated in this diagram. So those are just some basic floral parts. Not all of these parts will be on every flower, but it is a really good starting point. Then the tomato on the right-hand side of the diagram is basically showing how different parts of that evolve throughout the growing season to become the seeds that we harvest. But there's actually on the other slide a more nuanced look inside the ovary itself, which is giving us the fruit with the seed inside that we will be studying today. So essentially, an ovary, once it has been pollinated from pollen of another flower of the same type, throughout the growing season, these different parts inside, for example, the triploid endosperm cell, the integument and the zygote, these are just different cells within that ovary with the pollen that will be swelling, creating on the right-hand side, this is a peach, how the seed develops and the different aspects of the fruit basically translate into what we are growing. And so I will be going over examples of many, many plant species and their different fruits and their different seeds as we go along. And I will be starting, so some of this is a little bit seasonal. For example, I'm starting with Clatonia virginica, which is of the family Montiaceae. It is a beautiful wildflower native to the East Coast, and it is a spring ephemeral. It is a plant that I find year after year, this is in Rock Creek Park here in DC, and sometimes you can just find complete understories filled with this plant, with these pink stamens in the middle of these white petals, absolutely lovely. And this was the first year that I examined Clatonia, or spring beauty, developing its seeds. And I thought this was a really great place to start because it is one of the first flowers to bloom in the spring. So the photo on the right is showing how after a couple days of flowering, that stalk, that pedicel, or I guess in this case, it's considered a peduncle, elongates, and then the capsules are the fruits that are beginning to ripen from the bottom to the top. You can see the bottom of that stalk is green and is actually developing a fruit that we can't necessarily see from this angle, whereas at the top, the flowers are still budding out. So there's sort of a gradient between flowering and then when the fruit begins to develop. And if I go to the next slide. So here's a better example of the capsule. I have plucked one out from the stem, and on the right-hand side, I have essentially just like squeezed the capsule open. Botanically, a capsule is a seed pod that splits open in different ways, usually along a defined seam. So that is just a fancy way of saying this compartment opens with many sections. I thought it was interesting that Clatonia is a capsule because, as you will see throughout the rest of the presentation, there are many, many, many different kinds of capsule fruits in the plant world. And I'll have many different examples that show these different seams a little bit more clear. What I thought was interesting, though, about this seed in particular is that it has an elaiosome. And elaiosome in Latin, to break that word down, elaion is the Latin word, or the Greek word actually, for oil, and soma is the Greek word for body, which translates to an oil body. The elaiosome has that white part on the right-hand side of the seed, which is actually dense in lipids and proteins, which ants seek out and bring into their like larval beds where their young are. They will feed off of the lipid or the fat and then discard the seed among their frass or dung, and it'll actually aid the germination of that seed, which is just a really fascinating aspect to this particular plant. Moving on, next in the early spring, one of my favorite native plants, I'll probably say that 100 times throughout this presentation, but Pachyra aurea is of the Asteraceae family, which is known for its composite flowers. We have ray petals and disc flowers, making a typical daisy-like flower. And I have a video here showcasing the range of in full bloom and then in full ripening fruit. And a ripened fruit for an Asteraceae plant is known as a cypsela. Multiple cypsela are called cypselae. And in this video in particular, which I will play, and so right there at the end of that video, I take the cluster of white fluff and you can see at the base of them, there's sort of like a tan component. That is what's actually considered the cypsela. That's the fruit itself. And then attached, the white fluff that we are seeing, that is called a papae, or multiple papae are called pappuses. A cypsela and a papae are what makes a asteraceous fruit. There has been some distinction between the botanical scientists to designate is a cypsela sometimes an achene, is a cypsela a modified achene, and these are just fancy words to say that like it is a fruit of the daisy family. Just to kind of showcase this botanically, what is designated as a cypsela is an inferior ovary. So this diagram just basically showcases where the ovary is in the grand scheme of the floral structure is designating whether it's a cypsela, which is the case in the Asteraceae. To further this, the papae, or the fringed, the white part of that video, can come in multiple different styles. So a lot of times the pappuses are winged for wind dispersal, and sometimes they're actually created with barbed hooks, which attach to fur or skin or some type of clothing to aid its dispersal. The next plant to talk about is Euphorbia amygdaloides. This plant was photographed in the Ripley Garden, and I thought it was absolutely beautiful because these flowers are known as something called a cyathium. So the entire head looks like a full flower, but in reality, the flowers have been modified to only have their sexual parts visible or even on the plant itself. So here, zooming in on the yellow, you'll notice those very fine pieces. Those are the stigmas that are releasing the pollen. And then right next to it with those two prongs, those are the stigmas, which are accepting pollen, that is the female part. So over on the right, you follow the female parts are beginning to swell into these ripening capsules that are still green. And if you do not do anything with the plant you will quickly notice that these capsules explode all over the garden. So sometimes when you want to control a euphorbia in the garden, you will cut the ripening seed pods just before they begin to explode, or otherwise you'll have certain euphorbias all over your garden. In this case, I was really fascinated by what's considered a carunculate seed, and that is another fancy word for a type of Eliosome, remember from the Clatonia, that for some reason within the Euphorbia family, they call the Eliosomes carunculates, which is just that orange part at the base of the seed. Um, upon my reading, these carunculates don't do anything specific. It's just how the seed develops, but they're notable enough to deserve a fancy word. Next up is Mertensia virginica of the Boraginaceae family, or the borage family. Another lovely spring flower that is native to the East Coast. It loves to grow in damp soils along riverbanks. And they have this lovely spiral-like inflorescence. You can see those white parts coming up on the right-hand side. Those are the stigmas left behind after the flower has fallen off of the plant. And then after all those flowers have fallen off the plant, on the left-hand side, you see in the center there of the green sepals that are left behind, nutlets are ripening. And on the right-hand side, this photo is not mine, but you can see what those nutlets look like once they have completely ripened. And I have been trying for years to find Virginia bluebell seeds off of the plants that we cultivate in the gardens, but I have still not been able to find them. I'm curious if it is like a pollination thing that I am not, that we're just, the seeds aren't ripening, but I have a picture found online, so that was helpful. The next plant I want to talk about is Sephora coreensis, which is actually a rare endemic plant from Korea in the Fabaceae family. And this plant is propagated over in the hopped garden. I love its early spring yellow yellow petals, typical of the Fabaceae or the pea family. They have these sort of oppressed petals that are folded in. And then to talk about the Fabaceae fruit, which is known as a legume. Legumes are considered a bean pod, and it is pretty common throughout the entire bean family to have a legume. And what that means is that a legume will split along two seams with the seeds inside. So here, maybe about 2 months after the bloom, I harvested some of these fruits, which are legumes, which will have the seeds inside. More features from the Fabaceae or the pea family are Baptisia australis, which has been widely cultivated into many different flowering colors. We have yellow here, purple, there's a maroon, there's a brown, there's absolutely stunning native plant. And here I wanted to show the differences between that legume, unripe early in the summer, it's still green, those seeds are green, they could not be planted in the garden, to in the middle we have a ripe legume with the seeds taken out on the right-hand side. And another Fabaceae plant that's been one of my favorites to work with this summer is Lab purpureus, or the hyacinth bean. Also growing in the Enidae hopped garden next to some castor beans. In the middle, classic legume, bean pod shape. And then on the right, there is the seeds of the hyacinth bean with what's called a hilum, which is that white part on the seed, which is really just a mark left on the seed from while it was attached and ripening in the ovary. So in that middle picture, that white hilum is developing because of its attachment to the fruit itself. All right, next we have another favorite that I've been working with this summer and have been collecting seeds everywhere I go is Consolida ajacis. It is from the Ranunculaceae, which is a really fun word to say, and it is the buttercup family. This is a non-native annual plant. but I really adore it because it flowers prolifically for about a solid month and then makes an infinite number of seeds. So right here on the right, you see these follicles. This is a new fruit type, which is similar to a capsule, but in that a follicle opens only on one seam. So you can see down here below that purple flower on the right-hand side, just that one split going down, um, and that is a follicle. It only opens on one side of the fruit. And I have some videos here of myself collecting the seeds. And this is just on my back patio. I grew these from seed and they flower and ripen all within the matter of a few weeks. And you can just sprinkle those seeds back into the pots that you were growing your first crop. And by the fall, I'm actually having some germination now. So hopefully I'll get some more of these blooming later this fall. Another plant to showcase in the Radunculaceae is the Aquilegia or the columbines. And there's a lot of different columbines, many that are cultivated, many that are native. Um, and I just really loved this cultivated red and inner pink petaled Aquilegia on the left. And then I wanted to showcase on the right, a white flowering columbine with its nectar spurs twirled on the back side of that flower, absolutely stunning. And then the green follicles that are ripening right next to that. And I wanted to point out the difference in these follicles versus the consolida from the last slide. This is 5 follicles all fused into one, whereas in the consolida, it was just one isolated follicle that had many seeds in it. This Aquilegia has 5, but can also have sometimes 15 follicles fused all together. Here is another example of the 5 fused follicles on the left. And I have another video of me collecting from these follicles. Aquilegias produce a ton of seeds per fruit. It's definitely a favorite of mine to collect throughout the late spring. And here on the right-hand side, you can just see all of those brown ripened follicles and the many, many, many seeds that they produced that year. A third example of the Radunculaceae, which does not have follicles, rather it ripens into capsules. This is a better example of a capsule because a capsule is really defined by its ability to separate into multiple sections. So on the left, we have the Nigella sativa, a beautiful annual plant as well. And then on the right, a still ripening green capsule, which I thought just looks so alien. It is like otherworldly in how just those seeds are stacked in there in their each different compartments. And then here's a video of the seeds that have ripened within that balloon-shaped capsule. This is also from the Ripley garden. Really just an interesting plant to work with. And they self-sow very easily, so you almost don't have to do anything to get these plants coming back in your garden year after year. I wanted to highlight Geranium maculatum from the Geraniaceae family. It has a different kind of capsule with these beaked appendages, still green, still ripe here in mid-spring. But then when these capsules do ripen, really fascinating because they split into 5 different cells. It only looks like 4 here in the photo because the 5th ones have already broken off. But these cells spring open, which is why you get that twisted appearance, and it literally explode and catapult the seeds in the understory, which is how the plant spreads. I was able to open up a capsule before they twisted and flung their seed everywhere. So I have 2 seeds here on the right-hand side to highlight that. Another favorite native plant, this time it is a small understory tree. This is a Semina triloba from the Ananaceae, also known as the pawpaw. And on the left, maroon flowers that are pollinated by flies, generally, I think the science is saying. And then early spring, we have ripening fruits, which the pawpaw fruits are actually botanically considered a berry. And late summer, these berries are almost ripe. They've swollen, they're quite large. And then on the right-hand side, we see that when the berries or the pawpaws have ripened, they will just fall naturally from the tree, and you can just see the outline of some pretty large seeds within that fruit. Now, botanically speaking, a berry is an entire is a fruit with the entire outer layer um, uh, fleshy. It can be tough, but the seeds will never be in a stone, such as a peach, which has that hard stone. The seeds in a berry will be loose and not in a protective coat. And I wanted to showcase how pulpy getting these seeds out of the fruit can be, but then also in contrast, just how stunningly beautiful and large they are on the right-hand side. Um, I really love working with these seeds. They demand attention, and working with this native fruit is a real joy. They've been ripening this past month, and I'm sure you could find them somewhere along a river if you are anywhere in the East Coast. Another berry I wanted to highlight from another native tree is Diospyros virginiana from the Ebenaceae. There is a photo up in this corner of the flower, very tiny, 4 petals. And then this was just ripening in the pollinator garden earlier this week, and I got to enjoy the very sweet native persimmon with its 2 seeds inside. Another tree that I wanted to highlight its seeds from is Magnolia virginiana, another native from the Magnoliaceae family. Here in the middle, this is another example of a follicule fruit that is actually an aggregate. So there's multiple follicles per fruit that have basically been melded together while it is ripening. So those are green, and you can see on the right-hand side, each follicle on the fruit then splits open to reveal one seed. Remember, the follicle is a fruit that opens only on one side. So when you have multiple follicles, it is an aggregate. And all of those seeds are wrapped in a very shiny red seed coat, which is absolutely beautiful to see in the wild or in the cultivated beds that we have around all the museums there. Magnolia virginiana is a very common street tree even. Another tree that I wanted to highlight with a different type of fruit is Maclura pomifera of the Moraceae, or the mulberry family. So on the left, you have the Maclura flowers. All of those light yellow appendages you see are the stigmas, which are, again, those female parts of the flower that are receiving pollen from a male tree that will then swell into this middle photo here, huge multiple fruit. And a multiple fruit is a cluster of many ripened ovaries, thinking back again to that initial flower diagram. So many ripened ovaries formed from many clustered flowers, all crowded together. As you can see, all of those stigmas on the left are very crowded. It's going to create many different ovaries in the middle. And then this tree is growing over a very popular corner, and all the fruits fall on the ground, and the wheels of the cars smash open the fruits and do all the dirty work so that I can pick the seeds right on out, and it makes my work that much easier. I've really enjoyed learning about this plant this year. And it is, again, a native plant to the East Coast. Another beautiful plant that I worked with this year is Papaver somniferum. This plant was growing in mass next to the Arts and Industries building earlier this spring, and I have a video just of that mass. You can see the flowers. Next to those are ripening green capsules. Very tall. And what I learned about this stand of poppies is that no one intentionally planted them. All of these seeds from these capsules just fell or were spread in the bed at some point last year. And sure enough, this spring, they had no problem germinating in place and creating a lush field of poppies to complement the early spring. I have these capsules. Once they are ripening, they dry and dehiss with these plate-like stigmata, which are at the top of the capsule, that they open and literally are windows for the seeds to disperse. So if that plant is waving in the wind, those seeds will find the window openings and drop out, and it is how those seeds naturally spread. Oh, and one other thing about the poppy, these capsules are what's considered a unilocular capsule, which is just a fancy word for saying if I was to cut that capsule in half, it would just be one opening in the middle. Some capsules have many different compartments. We'll see later in my hibiscus example, the different compartments, but in this case for the poppy, it's just one open compartment or a unilocular capsule. Here is Eschlosia californica, Papaveraceae, the poppy family again, the California poppy with a little bit different kind of capsule. It's very long and narrow with the seeds lined up there. And these seeds actually explode, so I had a hard time finding and photographing these fruits in these capsules, but really lovely plant to work with and also self-sows very easily in the garden. So I wanted to spend some time in the middle of the presentation to talk about the Asteraceae. It's such a large plant family, and there's a lot of very interesting botany going on. So to start off, I wanted to highlight Echinacea purpurea, and I have a video highlighting some of its different parts. So a typical Asteraceae composite flower has these ray petals, which are the purplish pink flower petals on the outsides of what's called a capitula or a flowering head. And then in the middle, there are many, many disc flowers, which are individual flowers all lined up in the center of that flower. Now, we're not actually seeing those disc flowers on this echinacea, but what we are seeing is what's called a palea. And those are simply bracts that surround the fruit within that flower. So if I go to the next slide, as the season goes on the left-hand side, those orange palea elongate and turn brown. And then in the middle of them is actually the cypsela, which we talked about earlier with the pachyra. Those have ripened. And in this video, you can see my coworker Sylvia opening up that capitula to reveal the ripe fruits. Basically just have to break open that flowering head, and it'll be a nice healthy mix of the cypsela, which is the fruit where the seed is contained, and then those palea bracts, which are basically just chaff. I would winnow these seeds here on the right from the chaff because none of that is going to aid in growing new seeds next year. Another asteraceous plant is Cynara cardunculus. This looks very closely to an artichoke, and they are closely related. But we grow this ornamentally on the north side of the Natural History Museum. And so I collected a seed head after it had flowered and it was ripening, all clustered up. I needed a knife to then cut into it in half to showcase again its cypsela and its long pappuses for wind dispersal. And really large cypsela here. These seeds, like I have so many seeds now after collecting just one flowering head of this, but I really enjoyed learning about this plant and its similarity to artichoke. One of my favorite plants in the late summer is Vernonia noveboracensis, which is the New York ironweed. And these have much more pronounced disc flowers, whereas on the echinacea, we couldn't even see those disc flowers. Here in the ironweed, they're very large, very pronounced, very showy, and there are no ray petals on this plant, whereas the echinacea had those very beautiful pink ray petals. Sometimes you can have 20 to 60 per capitula or flowering head. And then again, later in the season, we get that typical cypsele fruit, which is hiding under those feathery papae. And here is a video of me just having fun flicking those seeds off of the plant and spreading. And this plant loves to spread, so. All right. I couldn't talk about the Asteraceae without talking about sunflower or Helianthus annuus. This is one of the best examples of the difference between ray petals, or ray petals and disc flowers, or sorry, ray flowers and disc flowers. So as you can see in the middle here on the right, all of these disc flowers are clustered so closely together, and they are revealing, if I scrape those away, the sepsellae underneath. Now, the sepsellae on this do not have that typical papae or that white feathery component because the seeds on the sunflower are not wind dispersed. They tend to be eaten by birds, which is their main method of dispersal. And here's some more examples of different plants in the Asteraceae. I really like this series of different yellow flowers with the various stages of my hand after a day's work in the garden, collecting seeds. All of these are sepsella. Every seed from an asteraceous plant will be considered a sepsella. This is Silphium perfoliatum, a pretty aggressive plant, but stunning, can grow up to 10 feet tall. And here I wanted to show a sepsella with a reduced and awn-like papae. They have these sort of prongs at the top of the seed, which is just a modified version of those feathery components. And lastly, in the Asteraceae, my favorite combination for late fall, Solidago rugosa with Symphyotrochum nova angliae. And then on the right-hand side, all of those plants gone to seed and ready to fly away in the wind to germinate in new places. All right, moving on, we have Verbena bonariensis, which is of the Verbena family. And I wanted to showcase this because later on in today's today's lecture, I'll be giving you some instructions on how to make your own seed packet. And here is a seed packet in action. Textbook skills right there in order to collect. And once you learn how to make a seed packet, I'm sure that you'll be using that for years and years to come when it comes to collecting seed out in the garden. Okay, so a different fruit to talk about, different plant to talk about is Callirrhoe involucrata. I think I spelled that wrong, of the Malvaceae or the marshmallow family, actually. This is another native plant found growing on the 12th Street side of Natural History Museum. And this fruit is called a schizocarp. And what a schizocarp means is multiple pieces that break off as individuals. And if you look around that wheel on the right-hand side, each of those is an individual fruit with one seed inside. And it's a really fascinating fruit because I learned it in my botany class as a cheese wheel. And you can divide it and almost slice it like you would pieces of a cheese. Hibiscus, classic example of a capsule fruit. So we have here the flowers blooming and then fading off. That yellow sort of star looking shape is the sepal of the flower left behind. And then in the middle, that little capsule, which will develop into a much larger capsule with 5 chambers holding those seeds inside. This is one of the best examples of a 5-lobed compartment capsule. Next, we have Cephalanthus occidentalis of the Rubiaceae family. Really just a stunning plant to work with. It's another native, and you can see the various stages of the flower from just about to bud out here to fully flowering with all of its stigmas out and receptive, to browning here down in the lower half, and then eventually all of those flower parts fall off to ripen into what's considered a 2-seeded nutlet. And a nutlet is a type of nut that is basically just very small And botanically speaking, a nut has a hard seed coat and a big endosperm section. So an endosperm is basically just like a nutritious food source for a germinating seed. So if a nut has a lot of endosperm, if a seed has a lot of endosperm, then it is considered botanically a nut. And a small nut is considered a nutlet. Many different terms here to talk about plants. One of the most important plants for monarch butterflies is our Asclepias species from the Apocynaceae. Here we have on the left, Asclepias syriaca, and this video on the right is Asclepias tuberosum, with bumblebees pollinating all of these beautiful hooded flowers. Absolutely stunning to see up close. And these flowers ripen into large follicles on the left with some milkweed beetles running around. And then on the right, those follicles in the fall will dehisce and open to reveal seeds with a silky coma or a comy, which is not a pappus because we're not dealing with the Asteraceae. They're what's called a coma, and this fluffy, silky feathers to aid in wind dispersal. All right, the next plant I have is Aristolochia fimbriata of the Aristolochiaceae, and this is a very interesting flower to look at. It has a long perianth tube without any petals or a corolla, which is basically what a group of flowers would be called. And I've cut here this tube, this flower tube open to reveal the way it traps insects inside of itself to ensure pollination down on these almost crown-like structures at the base of the flower. And once that flower has been pollinated, it also ripens into capsules. And by the time it's done ripening, it splits open and dehisces naturally, revealing a cluster of seeds inside that fruit. All right, next up I have Agastache funiculum. This is a hyssop plant, and it's been growing on my back patio all summer. We have a bee making sure all of these individual flowers get pollinated, which is very important so that this time of year, I can scrape all of those flowers and collect its many nutlets or tiny seeds. And these plants make a ton of seeds, let me tell you. I didn't even have to sprinkle any into my pots this year because they did all of the work for me. Another plant of the mint family is Ocimum basilicum or basil. This is a purple leafed variety of basil. And I like this picture on the right because it really shows the best view of 4 nutlets that are ripening still. They have that whitish tinge. They will ripen dark black or brown, and they are held within the calyx or those sepals. It's a modified structure made into a tube. And here's another example of those sepals that have been modified into a tube, which are holding the seeds in Salvia officinale, the culinary salvia or sage, Salvia lyrata, which is a native plant, and recently redescribed Salvia rosmarinus or rosemary. More from the mint family. I really enjoy working with Monarda species. Here is me collecting some ripe seed heads just after flowering. This is Monarda bradburyiana, as the label says, out here in the pollinator garden. And here's some videos of me trying to discover which seed heads have nutlets and seeds inside and which do not.
Well, there's no seeds in that.
right, and I'm noticing the time. It's now 12:45, and I have a couple more slides to go, but I will rush through these next couple so that I have time for the seed packet and some questions at the end. So Apuntia humifusa of the Cactaceae family, bright yellow flowers, and then we pick the berries, which are also called tunas in the winter after they've ripened. And then you split that berry or that tuna open to discover these beautiful arillate seeds. Arillate seeds just basically means there's an aril there surrounding the seed, which is just simply a specialized outgrowth. Again, we have these terms for all of these differences within the botanical world, sometimes just to name them, but I thought this was an absolutely beautiful seed to talk about. Another poppy family plant, Argemone mexicana, with its capsule here on the right. Datura stramonium, a spiny capsule this time with its seeds splitting open on the right-hand side. Absolutely beautiful flower and fruit, very poisonous plant at the same time. Nicotiana or tobacco of the Solanaceae, capsule here on the right, opening up with its seeds. Ruellia humilis of the Acanthaceae, another capsule, this time with lance-like bracts at the underneath, at the bottom of the seed, at the bottom of the fruit, with seeds showcased on the right. Penstemon digitalis, the Plantagenaceae, you can see the various stages from flower to ripening capsules all the way on the right, and splitting those capsules open to reveal the seeds inside. And getting to the end, I also wanted to highlight a house plant that you can also collect seeds from. And this is just one example of my Hippiastra miniatum of the Amaryllidaceae. A lot of times these are called Amaryllis, which is actually a different genus. But this is a very just typical house plant to have around the Christmas time, blooming, lots of different cultivars. But I wanted to highlight this because you don't just have to collect seeds outside, you can do so inside. This plant flowered and then ripened into what's called a trivalve capsule, which then splits open to reveal these beautiful flattened discoid seeds, which I haven't tried growing these, but I'm wondering how they would fare. Okay, so now it is 12:48. I have some time to showcase how to make a seed packet. So if you do happen to have a scrap piece of paper around you, go ahead and follow along with these step-by-step instructions. No worries if you don't have a piece of paper on you. This presentation will be recorded and happy to share the resources in a different manner. But so first you take your scrap piece of paper, step one, and you're gonna fold it up from the bottom to the top into like a hot dog style type bun, as at least I used to learn it in elementary school. Step three, you have that first fold, and now you're going to fold it down 1 centimeter. That is going to begin the second side to the packet. We're basically making a wall here. And then step number 4, you're just taking that 1 centimeter fold and you're folding it again over itself. So it's 2 folds from the top down to make that side hold. And I apologize if I'm going really fast. I can't see anyone out there, and I know teaching virtually with no audience that I can visually see is a little challenging, but hopefully y'all are following along or can try this out on your own later. Number 5, step 5, flip your folds completely over. So you're working with a flat piece of paper at this point, and you're going to fold that left corner diagonally down to make a point. You'll see your 2 folds there revealed itself after folding. And step number 7, that point that was exposed after that last step, you then actually tuck that into the creases of the folds there. It's very hard to explain this virtually. I wish this was maybe an in-person activity and I could walk around and make sure everyone was getting the correct folds. hopefully this is making sense. And then once you fold that point inside itself, you actually have 3 enclosed sides with an opening here on the right-hand side, which is the point in which you would go out into the garden and collect whichever seeds you have. And then once you have filled your packet with seeds, step 9, you're just going to make the same folds on the right-hand side, sealing that packet on all 4 sides. When you're done, it should look like step number 10, both of those points closed off with the seeds inside, and never forget to label which seed you collected, the date, and where that seed came from. You may think you'll remember, but let me tell you, all of these seeds start looking the same after you deal with many, many different kinds. So make sure to label it however you need to remember what you collected from your garden. And that concludes my presentation on seeds and how to find them. I have a final picture of amaranthus collected from the community garden I was at this past weekend. It is a heavy self-sower too, so look out for that one. And I will open up now for questions and comments and
Terrific.
like that.
I feel like I walked through the garden and learned more about how individual seeds look, understand the terminology that will help me speak with another person, another scientist, another horticulturist, and especially what they look like, because seeds come into so many sizes, shapes, figures, forms, whatever. And to save the seed, you have to understand what is the seed and what is all just the fluff that goes around it, whether it be real fluff or just extra pieces like you're showing in your hand. And so that was very good, Philip. Thank you, because that's the most important thing to know. What am I supposed to save? We've had a couple questions that also, I wanted to remind people this is part 1. We will have part 2. We'll go into some more of the practical answers to go along. But what I wanted to share with you is there's so many steps past this to be able to get a seed to germinate. So someone asked about magnolia, someone asked about pawpaw. When you're saving those seed, a lot of them have to be planted fresh, and you have to do different things to it to get to grow. Like scarification means that you have to scratch it, you have to scar it in order for the seed coat to split open and for it to grow. You also have to go through vernalization, which means going through a cold and warm period. So for both pawpaw and for magnolia, you have to do that. It's best planted when the seed is fresh, but you want to nick them both before you plant them. You want to keep them moist, and you want to do it outside if you can, so that they are being put through the freeze and thaw periods to get them to germinate and to grow. But we'll go more over that in step 2. In the meantime, read up on your seeds and you'll find all this information online and more terms for you to have in your belt. And somebody said they would love to purchase the seed packet assortment from Phil. And then they got the idea, great, can we purchase it from you? We actually don't sell seed, but maybe you have friends that have some of these plants in your neighborhood, and you can talk them into sharing some of the seed with you. So we really, I'm looking just to see if there's anything. We don't share any seeds at our gardening events, unfortunately, but like I said, go ahead and see if you have some friends. Philip, what was your most favorite part about this whole exercise with, I'm going to say playing with all the seeds, because it's too much fun to consider work?
Yeah, my favorite part about this whole project, and it's not even, I'm presenting today, by no means is over. I will continue collecting seeds for years and years to come. But really what I love about this is I see seed collecting really as an act of meditation in the garden. A lot of times we think, okay, what is blooming? What is blooming? What flowers do I have to look at right now? But for me, it's really just asking yourself, well, how are my plants changing throughout the year? When is it flowering? What happens next? Is it fruiting? Of course it's fruiting. What does the fruit look like? And then when do I know that the seed is ripe? And when do I know that that fruit has reached its point? to begin collecting. So it just requires a lot of patience, and it requires like a daily examination of the garden spaces that you may relate to or have in your yard or around your block. And even when something has stopped flowering, there's always something more to examine and to explore. And that's really just what I love about this activity, is that your plants are always doing something new, even if it's not just a beautiful flower. And that's what keeps me coming back more and more, just to see what's changing.
And that perfectly is a perfect example of what you need to do, because someone asks, how do you tell when something's ripe? Well, you need to be able to do the process you just did and watch it all the way through. A
Yeah.
seed is going to be ripe when this is what I learned anyway, the seed on a hard surface and push down on it with your fingernail. If it
Hmm.
cracks open, that's good, because then or it doesn't crack open at all, that's good. If it kind of like squishes and there's so much moisture that comes out of it, it's not ripe. So it's good to check all the way through those stages so you can say, oh, nope, this is not ripe at all. I can tell, because the technical term is you want the seed to be only 8% of its moisture left in the seed in order
Mm.
for it to be considered ripe. I don't know how you tell 8% with any of the equipment I have, so I'm going to rely on squishing it and see what happens,
Mhm.
and see what happens. How do you tell?
Well, I was gonna say, unless you're dealing with pawpaw, because you'll squish that plant open and it will
Yeah.
definitely be ripe. And if you are trying to squish it before it's ripe, it will be very hard. So again, all of these plants have their own nuances. You've seen all the different kinds of fruits that they have. And so nothing is consistent in the botanical world, and there are no hard and fast rules to any of this. And that's why just finding your own exploratory practice and how you learn these plants is just the best. You can read all about it, you can read when they'll be ripe, but if you are noticing your plants every day, then that is the best way you will learn all of these different facets to their many infinite characteristics.
I agree. Have fun with it.
Yeah.
Somebody wanted us to show close-ups of the seed packets being folded, but we
Mm,
have a secret. We do share all of our videos online, so when it goes online in about 2 weeks, you'll be able to replay that section over and over again and really
mm,
be able to fold along with it so that you can
yeah.
understand better how it's done. I love that little tip because it what a beauty to be able to reuse something and then keep your seeds in your own little seed packet. So that's a great tip for everyone. I'm looking to say, everybody says you're a rock star. Thank you so much for what you've shared with us. It really was a good learning episode. So I'm very appreciative for that, because we have this thing called plant blindness. I'm sure you've heard of it. We don't even pay attention to what's around us. Pay attention and you're going to learn a lot, just like Philip
Mhm.
did. So, with that, I want to thank everybody for joining us. I want to thank Philip for an excellent presentation. Just, they love the videos because that really makes things come alive. You feel like we're walking with you in the garden. But thank you for joining us today, and thank you for supporting Let's Talk Gardens. We'll see you again next week. Bye bye.
Thank you.